Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Excited for today's conversation. It's a conversation that I have never had, and I can't believe after 300 and I don't know what episode this is, 325, maybe 328, I have not touched on this topic. And so today I have a longtime friend, Eric Kaufman, and I have a new friend, Brian Zimmerman. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to jump into our conversation for the day. Eric, how are you, sir? How is Blacksburg, Virginia on this fine Friday afternoon?
Yeah, it's a wonderful spring day in Blacksburg. Really enjoying it. Glad to connect with you on the podcast, Scott. I have been a longtime listener. I don't know if I listened to all of them, but I think I've listened to most of your Phronesis podcasts and forced my family to do the same. And certainly appreciate the history we've had connecting, I think, first with the Association of Leadership Educators and serving on that board together.
Yes. So thank you, sir, Professor of Leadership, Eric Kaufman. Brian Zimmerman, CEO of the Cleveland Metro Parks, award-winning, just an incredible organization. Sir, tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a true honor. Getting to talk about leadership in the sense of the hubbing around like agriculture and growing up in rural Wisconsin, currently in Cleveland, Ohio. Never imagined essentially a desk job. Really loved to be outdoors and whatever that meant. And it could have meant walking in the woods, fishing in a stream. It could have been showing cattle at the county fair. It could have been something, a leadership journey, judging soils for FFA. In my current role here of Cleveland Metro Parks, we have approximately 25,418 acres. We have 9 golf courses, 18 park reservations, 5 nature centers. We do have some agriculture. We do some farming. We have a world-class zoo. We grow a bunch of our own browse. So it's a very dynamic system. We have a 100-person police force. We run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
And I loved, Brian, approximately 25,418.
Details matter. In leadership, you want to be definitive in how you answer a question so you leave no gray area. That's one of the things I think too often we take for granted that people like they get the in-between. Sometimes you have to fill it in between to make sure that they exactly know what you were talking about and it's not directives, but it's most times it's like direction. And so that helps. I always say details matter, and it matters to us that we are stewarding the 25,418 acres. That matters to us.
Oh, and it's an organization that has mattered to me and my family in very real ways. So for listeners, it was probably almost 20 years ago now that I stumbled across this organization called the Association of Leadership Educators, ALE. And there's an annual conference. It's every summer. Would love for you to prioritize that if you are in leadership education. And I stumbled upon this wonderful group of human beings, but the background and the history of that organization, it's an agriculturally based organization. And so, Eric, would you give us a little bit of a history lesson on ALE, but then also leadership from this background of 4-H, Future Farmers of America, FFA. So go ahead and give us a little bit of a context setting, if you would.
Yeah, and I'll just paint my picture into that background a little bit too. I grew up in Ohio, rural community. Like other rural students, and maybe particularly those that are more introverted, probably lacked a little bit of self-confidence, wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, and found the opportunity to grow that self-confidence and learn about leadership through a student organization. And that happened to be FFA, which historically was Future Farmers of America. It has evolved. It grows leadership far beyond just the production agriculture side of things. And through that organization, that got me involved in agriculture education because that's the curriculum that's aligned with the student organization, and going through that process. And that history of developing youth in these rural areas is something that predates a lot of our formal leadership development programming.
Yes.
And I learned about some of that as I went on to graduate school and studied leadership more, and thinking about the history of some of the adult agricultural leadership programs, which also predated a lot of the programs that we see. Maybe you have a Chamber of Commerce program, something like that really focuses on community leadership. A lot of those are rooted in what was originally the Kellogg Farmer Study Program. And around the 1950s and 60s, there was this recognition that farmers being really good at farming and doing their thing on their farm, being really good at growing things, producing things, selling them at whatever marketplace they were headed to, that was not going to be enough. The issues in the broader society, whether we're talking about urban-rural interface, whether we're talking about government regulations, or even competitiveness, and realizing that, look, in order to make enough money, you've got to work beyond just your own skill set and collaborate with other people. And there was a recognition that individuals just being a really good farmer was not going to be enough. The Kellogg Foundation, the same foundation that the cereal comes from, they had resources that they said, let's bring together farmers and help them figure out how to collaborate, work together, and address a lot of these issues, develop some of their competencies in speaking, advocating for the work that they're doing. And that Kellogg Farmer Study Program was the foundation of many of the leadership programs that we see, even outside of agriculture today. And so you take that sort of the adult side with the youth side, with FFA and 4-H. Many of those things were rooted in land-grant universities that have a College of Agriculture and Life Sciences like Virginia Tech. And so then we saw leadership studies programs emerging in colleges of agriculture. And people outside of agriculture said, what in the world? Why is that in agriculture? Business doesn't have the sole opportunity to focus on leadership. The reality is that business puts money into leadership development. But outside of business, there's a lot of need for leadership. And we've been doing some work in the agriculture context for quite some time. We're celebrating about 100 years with FFA and even longer with 4-H. And we've had people that have been thinking about how do we develop leadership in that space and setting. And so I'm glad to be a part of it and continue to study that and help others in that space as well.
Well, and Brian, I went to the University of Minnesota. And so I was on our St. Paul campus where a lot of that programming was located. I know that Brian went to the University of Wisconsin. I believe, Eric, one of your degrees is from Ohio State, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
Bachelor's degree from Ohio State and then graduate studies at University of Florida.
Okay. I think in some of these ag leadership programs, there's hundreds and hundreds of students in these minors or these majors. Am I correct, Eric?
Yeah, particularly Texas A&M has had a large program, and they look different ways. Some are using the word leadership. Texas A&M for a while was using the word development because there were some questions about who owns this word leadership, so you can get competitive that way, but certainly some large programs. And when I was at Ohio State, we didn't have a leadership program per se, but the department that I was in has since been doing more in community leadership development. And when I went to graduate school at the University of Florida, there was some new emerging work there. And it really wasn't until graduate school that I thought, oh, could be a focused area of study beyond just someone who might be a motivational speaker at a conference. Like I knew that existed, but
Yes.
The idea that we were going to take more concerted effort to develop leaders and leadership was something that was really exciting to me to think about. That was a professional focus that I could have.
Okay, wonderful. So now, Brian, let's talk a little bit about your origin story here, sir. You came up you're leading an incredible organization right now. You came up through some of this programming. Would you tell us a little bit about that and how that formed you in your own growth and development?
And I think starting from where I am now, This is about a $250 million company that employs over 800 full-time people, multidiscipline. I think we have 35 doctors on staff of all different disciplines. And so that's where the current, but when you look at the foundation, and I think of Ohio, because I've spent almost 16 years here, 88 counties, there's a tremendous amount of rural counties in Ohio. And so when you look at the formative years of high school or FFA, Future Farmers of America, which is what I knew it as, had Hard Hands Health and 4-H, you had an opportunity to be elected to a position. So my very first position in leadership was the treasurer. And so we did ice cream socials and we had to sell ice cream, scoop ice cream, lemonade and things, and we raised money. And then we got to decide where we wanted to spend the money. And I remember I was the president at the time, and an individual, which I won't say her name, but she had indicated that she wanted to go to some, I don't know, what I would call historical place, which really wasn't a theme that the kids wanted to do. And I said, well, gee, that's great. But I think the kids really want to go to what I would call Wisconsin Dells, which is like a water park. And at the time, I didn't really necessarily realize it, but that was showing leadership in the face of adults trying to exert themselves. And so when you get opportunities to have some levels of leadership, and FFA was the same way. I was the sentinel first and then moved up into the president role in a vacuum because I was a junior as the president, which historically the president was the senior. The class above us really didn't have a lot of very good leaders in it. I aged up and then we got another group to come in. So I got my state farmer degree as a sophomore, which I was only one of two in the entire state at the time to get that accomplished. Some people have that essence of leadership around them and they embrace it and they love it. And I call it driving the bus. They want to be sitting in the front seat guiding, but there's strategy in who sits in the bus with you and how you build your teams and things around it. But you learn, we travel in a school bus from Belleville, Wisconsin to Kansas City, Missouri, on a bus. So we slept under the seats, all things you probably can't do now, but you learn how to work with a team. You learn how to use your voice. And these are some of the things that maybe aren't quite the same. And there's no video, but you think of the phone, people are connected that way. We had to connect through actual real conversation. And there's something to be said for the leadership dynamic of having that either truthful conversation or understanding emotional intelligence in leadership. We grew corn, soybeans, alfalfa, cows, and those types of things.
Eric, if you would, talk a little bit about how you interfaced growing up with any of these organizations. Were you a member of FFA or 4-H as well? I'm almost getting like a hint of almost like a cousin to scouting. Would that be accurate or no?
Yeah, I think there's a relationship. Certainly, scouting has a strong history in youth development and giving youth opportunities to grow and develop and learn, and all of that is part of that. Certainly 4-H has as well. 4-H is a little bit older than FFA. I was interested in being in 4-H. I think I had an older brother that was in it for a little while, and my parents decided it wasn't worth driving him to the meetings, so they weren't real excited about me getting involved in 4-H. The thing that seemed fun at the time is showing livestock at the county fair meant that they could get out of school because the county that I was in, the county fair was during the school year in September. And I thought, boy, if you could get off school and just hang out at the fair, that would be a fun thing to do. So I wasn't involved in 4-H. I had an older brother that was involved in FFA. He thought that he wanted to be a farmer, and so that seemed like a path. I thought, I'm not really interested in being a farmer. I'm looking elsewhere. But my mom actually saw the opportunities for leadership development through FFA and said, you really ought to try it out. And so I tried it out, really enjoyed it. My high school agri-science teacher seemed to take an interest in me and my opportunity for development and the goals that I had. And so I was really excited about that. The thing that I think is really important too, that I appreciate about FFA, my understanding is within the United States, it's the largest student-led organization. And so the idea that the students are making some of these decisions, like Brian talked about, like really moving into that space is different than maybe some of the other mentoring relationships that we see in scouting, or at times, depending on age levels, 4-H and some of those other organizations, where there's clearly some adult leaders who are in charge and they're guiding and directing the students. That happens in FFA. We have FFA advisors, but there really was encouragement from the founding of FFA to say, we need to give these youth at the time, farm boys, give them more confidence. And I was just looking at some material today down the hall because the department that I'm in at Virginia Tech is the founding of Future Farmers of Virginia, which became FFA. And one of the very first state FFA or state Future Farmers of Virginia officers, ended up being the president of Virginia Tech years later.
Okay.
And our basketball coliseum is named after that individual, President Castle. And anyway, those things are really appreciated. I appreciated going to leadership development workshops and conferences. I enjoyed public speaking competitions. I know Brian mentioned earlier something about a soil judging competition. I did. That was another thing where at the time, I think I was just walking in the hallway. I lived near a school, so I was in the school after the school day was over, and my ag teacher said, "Hey, Eric, do you want to get out of school tomorrow?" I said, "Sure, what are we doing?" He said, "Soil judging." I said, "I don't know anything about soil judging." He said, "I'll teach you on the way." So
There's bad soil and good soil. That's all yeah.
So there certainly is learning.
Yeah,
But part
yes.
of it is taking advantage of opportunities and then recognizing that each of us do have things to contribute, leaning into those relationships. I ended up being the state FFA president in Ohio and did that for a year, sort of a gap year between high school and college.
Oh, nice.
I really enjoyed that. That expanded my perspective because I traveled around the state, visited different schools, helped out with the FFA camp during the summer, just lots of different opportunities. And those experiences helped me to grow in my ability to engage in leadership and collaborate with others on shared approaches to leadership.
And okay, so love this. Brian, now, if I remember correctly, you're a member of Alpha Gamma Rho, AGR. Okay.
Yep.
Good. And you got a degree in soil. So you get to Wisconsin. Now, how does the theme continue here?
First and foremost, everything that Eric was talking about, and I think of extemporaneous speaking, parliamentary procedure. There were a lot of things that you learned that you didn't really realize at the time that were going to be valuable later in life. And earlier on the podcast, we started talking a little bit about the 88 counties and how rural Ohio is. A lot of our elected officials come out of those counties. And so if they have a background in leadership and some of these things, it actually helps on a higher level. But we grew up in the shadows of Madison. My hometown was only about 15 minutes from campus. So we, as kids, spent a lot of time up there, sometimes authorized and sometimes unauthorized time.
On State Street, yes.
On State Street, yeah. Halloween was a no-no for us, but we tended to end up there a number of times. But my parents were guardians of their kids. And my first semester, I stayed at home and really didn't have the richest college kind of freshman start. I think they were nervous. I run fast. Very fast. And I think they were just like, you were going to get yourself into trouble very quickly. But I did rush the fraternity, AGR, became an officer in the fraternity, did get into trouble for a little bit of time. But then that taught me I had to figure out how to get myself out of it. And sometimes you do things, there's cause and effect, and there was no way to others to help. And I had to do that myself. But the degree in soils really opened up the doors for a lot of other opportunities along the way. To be educated at a land-grant college, to be part of an ecosystem is, I don't know if there was a better place for me at the time than that group and that fraternity. The 50 guys that lived in the house, all still, I would say, very close to. A few of our battling cancer and other things, but the connectedness that you have to that group, I was an anomaly. Most of them were dairy science majors. So the cow guys, they had their kind of like ecosystem that they lived in. So there was only two soil guys, a couple of engineers, ag engineers, the nerds as we called them. But we tried to bring up the average at least a little bit in brain power there.
That's awesome. Eric, comment on that.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a great experience. Some similarities with my experience at Ohio State. I was in what was Alpha Tau Zeta. There was an Alpha Zeta fraternity that started at Ohio State as an honorary, and over time that needed to shift. And I was in a Alpha Tau Zeta was the fraternity, which is now a farmhouse fraternity at Ohio State.
Yep.
And so had that agriculture connection there, ended up serving as president of the fraternity. My major was agriculture education. So because of that experience in high school, I thought, boy, that'd be great if I can help others serve in that same role that my high school agri-science teacher had. I think I was also president of the Agriculture Education Society, and other groups got very involved there and really looked to some opportunities thinking about agriculture education, knowing that what I appreciated most about my own experience was the leadership development. But it was in this context of agriculture. And so I learned about some aspects of production agriculture beyond what I learned from growing up in a farming community, and used that to launch off into a professional career. To begin with, teaching high school agri-science. I ended up going to Florida. I met a Florida girl at Ohio State, and we decided we were going to get married. And so I applied to jobs in Ohio and Florida. And yes, Florida agriculture is very different from Ohio, even more different than I realized, but had the opportunity to teach high school agri-science there in Florida near Daytona Beach for 3 years. before going on to graduate school.
You know, it's also interesting. So at Madison, my father was at DTS, Delta Theta Sigma. At the time, they probably weren't as growth minded. And so AGR was where I went. And my son went to a state college, a state university in Columbus. And so he rushed DTS, which I thought was interesting. So there must be a generational skipping thing, but our son very much enjoyed his time. He ended up getting a degree in supply chain logistics operational systems, but then he got a minor in horticulture. So our family runs a little small farm, little sunflower farm in Carroll County, Ohio, still deeply rooted in agriculture, which is pretty cool, like the third, fourth generation.
Okay, so let's zoom forward a little bit. Brian, you mentioned Robert's rules or parliamentary procedure, some extemporaneous speaking. I think, what are some of those things that you learned back in high school that still inform your practice day to day, leading this multi-million-dollar organization?
I think there were some defining moments really along the way, having to, I would say, build a coalition of high school classmates at times. You have to learn how to build a coalition of support. So I think that was one of the things, so I had a very good foundation, I think, from leadership. But certainly, as Eric had mentioned, got to spend time in Washington, D.C. at some leadership things, ended up inside of an ice machine at one point in time. I was a sophomore, the seniors. I must have been small enough that they thought it would be really cute to put me inside of it. But you also had to learn your place. There was times that you had to learn, in leadership, sometimes that's one of the things of having a level of emotional intelligence. But the last job that I had was I was number 2 in charge of a 15,000 acre park system in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I use this often in leadership development, use your voice for good. I don't know what you're thinking if you don't tell me or articulate your position. Be succinct in that. And there are times when you have to use your voice and stand up. You don't have to be disrespectful. You just have to use your voice and detail what you're trying to get across. And I can think of many examples where I advocated for something. And I can tell you there was one very defining moment where I got put into a corner. The chief of staff for Scott Walker was a general, and he was a general. And so you had to be very succinct in your conversation, fairly quick. And I tried to articulate my position as best I could. And I got crunched back pretty quickly. And then I got yelled at by my current boss and then other people. And I was just like, wow. So then anytime I went to something, I was like the Boy Scouts would say, be prepared. And in leadership, you need to be prepared. If you're asked something, people always ask why I got more than others. It's because I had a list of 5 or 6 things and I had an elevator speech less than 3 minutes, because if that's all I was going to get with somebody, I need to be succinct as possible. And that mantra still lives with me today. Is if I can't get it done in 3 minutes, then it's probably something that dictates or gets to move on. So it's the level of detail, the level of conversation, and having that direct conversation is extremely important. But the platform really was set with those very early on agencies.
Eric, what I would love to hear from you right now is, obviously you are embedded in the leadership and followership literature. You know it like the back of your hand. So looking back to some of your experiences, what just from an experiential standpoint sticks with you? It just aligns beautifully with the literature of what we should be doing. Anything come to mind for you?
Certainly, there's aspects of path goal leadership theory that really come to mind, and I've held on to that a lot. Part of what I was taught in my early FFA experiences was about goal setting and being clear on what the goal is. Brian, you talked about that, having some clarity, being focused on those things, and I think that can be really useful. And then what's the leader's job in that goal setting theory is removing the obstacles and providing support. And that's what my high school agri-science teacher did, and provided opportunities for me to grow and to be successful in areas that without him taking an interest in what my goals were and helping me along the way, that wouldn't have been possible. And that path goal theory, I think, is really useful. The other things that stand out to me, I've been in recent years more focused on leadership as practice that really looks at the behaviors and the things that create leadership that are not as much about an individual leader, but instead this space between. And I think that becomes really important in our agriculture context. Brian, you talked about your involvement in these different parks. And I think what is a difference in that setting versus someone who is leading a factory that's producing a widget, a very particular thing? Your parks have lots of different issues, I'm sure. There are systems and systems of systems that you've got to be paying attention to. And you start to realize you can't cover all of that. You don't know all of that. You don't have that insight on your own. And it was really a little bit in college for me that I had this recognition that being a really good leader myself wasn't going to be enough. I found myself overcommitted, involved with lots of different organizations at the time. And I realized I've got to rely on other people to be really good at what they're doing and let them do their thing. And if I try to force that, we're not going to be able to accomplish the goals that we've set. We're really going to make some mistakes along the way. I had to show up to some meetings knowing I wasn't as prepared as I would like to be, but if I'm surrounding myself with the right people and I'm empowering them to be successful, that we can accomplish great things together.
I'm so thankful for this conversation. I don't know that the public understands that this space exists, that this space has existed for decades and decades, has been a precursor to much of even maybe the Center for Creative Leadership or some of the public leadership programs like a Leadership Cleveland for us here in Cleveland, Brian, or Leadership Columbus or any of those types of organizations. You all have been doing that work. FFA and 4-H has been doing that work for decades. Some of the collegiate level organizations, Extension, we could start going into that conversation. Mm-hmm. But I think, and what I really appreciate about this is that the experiential nature of it. And in some ways, the competitive nature of it as well, in the sense that why do people practice? Well, to compete or to perform. And so this created that space to give us a reason why to engage in some of the work, build coalitions, influence others, build relationships, know your spot when it was your time to know your spot, as Brian said, and have a goal and make a difference in your community.
Yeah, I think you bringing up the competitive nature is an interesting component. We think about different sports. The competitive nature probably at times plays out on a certain level. You may be competing with others, but on a different level, you're competing with yourself. So then in that mindset, then there's also an opportunity for people to collaborate and share with one another and support one another along the way. And so I think we see that happening. If you think just in terms of farmers, there's an aspect of pride that they want to have the best crop or livestock or whatever, and they want to do that. They also are very willing to support one another when they know that somebody else is in need. And we see that in some of these programs as well. When I was at graduate school at the University of Florida, I had the opportunity to help coordinate what is the Wedgeworth Leadership Institute for Agriculture and Natural Resources. And so we're combining the agriculture community with natural resources and recognizing a lot of these environmental issues and bringing people together. And it was very much an experiential program, giving people the opportunity for traveling seminars, learning with one another along the way. As a 2-year program, we've created something similar here in Virginia, the Virginia Agriculture Leaders Obtaining Results Program. There's similar programs like this around the country, but the experiences of bringing people together give an opportunity not only to see where, each participant, where they are in this larger system, in this process, and figure out how they can improve and contribute, but then also engage in the problem solving. My experience is when somebody completes that program, they appreciate that network that's built, because when they run into an issue, they're no longer having to solve it just on their own, but now they have a network of people that they can call and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. What ideas do you have, or how can you help with that? And there's an opportunity for people to take some of these issues that they see in their broader society and realize, look, that's not something I could tackle on my own, but collectively we can address some of these larger issues and needs and challenges. And I think that's where a lot of these agricultural leadership programs focus, especially when we get into the adult level, is figuring out how do we collaborate together.
Well, I'm seeing whether it's youth or through adulthood, we have life stages and states covered. Brian, what do you got, sir?
What's interesting, and I know we're coming up on the end, it's about mentorship. Eric mentioned that early on, having good mentors. And so if you're listening to this and you're at a younger, find a good mentor that you can bounce ideas off and learn in a one-on-one setting. And he also talked about empowerment. Empower yourself to be a leader, because at the end of the day, you have the right to step up. And I think that's one of the things. And also empowering your staff. That's one of the things you learn in leadership. You cannot control every outcome, and you cannot control, you'd like to know where the work product is going to get to, but you have to empower your people to get there. And I think the last thing is really that lifelong learning. We never stop learning. And when we look at, we're in our middle ages, but you still are learning. And I think of we invested in a farmers cooperative in Carrollton, Ohio, and they have a board. And if you want to be on a board of a cooperative, you've got to go through a training and in some leadership. So I think there's always this want to and this hunger to learn and continue to learn and how to evolve. And leadership is about that, understanding where you're at and where do you want to get to.
Love it. Eric.
Yeah, I'll just round out on the learning piece because the cooperative extension, which is part of land-grant universities, I think that's where that comes in. Scott mentioned that the Association of Leadership Educators was founded by cooperative extension professionals. And honestly, a number of those that founded that were not agriculture-focused professionals. They were focused on the home economics side, but they were in a College of Agriculture and Life Sciences because of that extension piece. But they were really focused on how do you meet people where they are? What's the thing they need to learn next? And they were doing some community leadership programming. And they said, how do we share ideas? And they came together for some workshops and said, let's start an association and learn from one another. Even before leadership education programs were available as a major or even a course, like at Ohio State, there was one class that was created that I could get into that was leadership focused. We didn't have necessarily leadership-focused classes. You learned in a variety of experiences. I teach leadership-focused classes now, but it's not something that you have to get into a book and study the terms to these theories, but you can actually experience it and you can learn a lot that way. And I really appreciate that part of my appointment at Virginia Tech is with Virginia Cooperative Extension and helping to facilitate lifelong learning. I even think about people that are finishing up a career and they've got a lot of life left, and they're figuring out how do I contribute in my community? And the way that they need to lead in that community setting may look different than how they needed to lead in that business setting, especially whether it's shifting from a for-profit to a nonprofit or having employees that had some sense of obligation in a transaction. All of a sudden, you've got to figure out, okay, how do I motivate people to come together for a community project and effort? And I think there's a lot of things that we can continue to dig into that to learn. There's lots to continue to uncover. It's an exciting place to learn and research. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. To the two of you, I am very thankful. I think probably what I'm about to hear, there may be some level of repetition, there may not be. But I always end up the podcast by asking, what is the practical wisdom in this conversation? So, Eric, I'm going to go to you. What do you think is the practical wisdom in the conversation we've just had? What stands out for you?
I think a key part is whether you're in agriculture or other spaces, if you really want to address these challenges that are broad system level challenges, we need to stop thinking about leadership as something that individuals do and start seeing it as something that communities build together over time. And I think you can do that a lot of different ways. But I think if you're learning in a community, I think if you're growing in a community and you're sharing leadership in that community, I think we can address a lot of the issues that we're facing in this world.
Awesome. Brian, sir.
I'm going to answer it this way. Common sense isn't always that common. And so when you think of how to solve together, sometimes it's laying out what you know and what you don't know, and then how do you work together? When we look at the divide across this great nation, whether you're on one side or the other, there's got to be a handshake. There's got to be a cross between differing opinions and leading through to lead. And at the end of the day, those are the things that we look for. And I call it GSD. And this is a podcast, so I won't use the middle initial, but it's getting things done. And the reality is whether you're elected or whether you're in a leadership role, the practical part is where you are empowered to do something, get something done. And so for us, we call it moving the ball. How do we move the ball down the court? How do we move it down the field? And that's in the practical side of things every single day. Why we're probably we've won the national gold medal 5 times, which is best managed park district, is because we believe in what we do every day. We set goals, objectives, and then we deliver on them. And that's what this community needs across this great country.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. For those of you who are listening, there are some links in the show notes. I want you to check them out if you'd like to learn a little bit more. And you know what? I really am thankful for your time today, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter Emily with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.